Okay, so today I'm going to be doing a quick rundown of my pedal board because I want to start a few video series about how to record and mix and master in your room. I've been doing this for a long time. I started recording overdubbing with cassette tapes in my room with a guitar that only had 4 strings, and oh, how the times have changed. So along the way, I've learned all of these things about, gear is just gear. You can make almost any gear sound good if you know what you're doing, but it sure makes it a lot easier to get a good recording if you start with the right stuff. And some stuff that works live or sounds good live or sounds good in the room doesn't really work well or sound great for recording. So that's kind of why I'm going over this today. Right, so I'm playing my Manson MD1 with the MIDI touchpad. We're not going to use the MIDI touchpad today. That'll be a whole different video, but it's got some pretty hot humbucker-like pickups and a Sustainiac in it. But basically, it's sort of a modified rock telly with some extra features, and that's what we're going into. Okay, and the routing is pretty simple. What I'm doing here is the pink cable there, that's my input. It's going into the Whammy DT. From the Whammy DT is going into all of my drive pedals before I go into the Fractal. So we're going into the Brothers AM, and then through the fuzzes, the If 6 was 9, Fat Fuzz Factory, and Fuzz Bender. And then I also have the EHX Deep Freeze, and then that's going into the input of my Fractal, which is over here. And as far as the Fractal goes, a lot of people I know are completely happy with distortion sounds and amp sounds and everything coming out of this, and they don't even put any pedals in front of their Fractal. But I found that the best drive sounds when using Fractal, well, in general, but also when using Fractal, is to have a real analog drive pedal going into the input of the Fractal into a clean or edge of breakup amp. So I'm using the Fender Twin Verb. When you play it clean, it's going to sound pretty much exactly like a Fender Twin Verb. Okay, so now we're inside of Logic, and we're looking at a song called Here We Are that I'm working on. As you can see, there's a lot of tracks in here, obviously. Okay, so before we get into how I track, let's talk about the Fractal side of stuff, the software side of Fractal. Fractal can be edited on the unit itself, but it's kind of a pain, and this software is really fast and convenient, so this is what I use. Inside FM9 Edit in the Fractal software, you'll see that I have an input here going into a double verb normal into the double verb cabinets, and I've got those all set up and EQ scooped and all of that. Then this goes into the out 3 to create my effects loop. So this will send Fractal's audio out to my pedal board, where it will go through not the drive pedals I showed you in the beginning, but the effects loop row on the top, which would be the H90, the tensor, and the mood. And then it comes back in right here with the in 3, and then that routes all the way through into whatever else I want to put like at the end of my chain after that. So I have a little plex delay and some reverb and stuff that I usually keep in here. But you know, these get swapped out, turned off if I'm using other effects. And then all that goes to an out 1. And you monitor all the levels and things here. You also have the button editing here, so I can set up my patches, like what I want all of these buttons to do and arrange them, and that's all there. Okay, once I get this set up in Fractal like this, all I have to do is plug in my pedal board, which will come in through here, hit an effects loop, and then back out, and everything sounds lovely. Okay, now inside of Logic, we have a song here I'm working on called Here We Are. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on here, but all I need to do if I'm recording with Fractal, right, because Fractal's my main audio unit, is go into here, settings audio. Right now it's set to my other audio interface so you can hear my voice, but there's the FM9. And what I usually do is select this as the input and then my audio interface as the output and listen to it through my audio interface. But you could also plug in headphones to the back of the Fractal if you wanted to, but this is where you set all of that. Fractal has a weird sort of latency that they still haven't fixed. It's not real bad. If you set your DAW down to really low samples like this, like 32 samples, that completely goes away, but that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, now we have our routing, right? We go into the pedals, all through the pedal board, into the Fractal effects loop, and then back out, and now it's all pumping into Logic. So the first thing you need when building this song, at least in my opinion, the first thing I want to start with is the drums. And that's where my friend Keegan comes in. He is a drummer. We used to play together in a band a lot. And he will take scratch tracks that I give him and create drums, and then we'll adjust them. Sometimes I'll have to fix a few things here and there, but usually it's pretty close. And then once we get the MIDI right, because this all comes to me in a MIDI track, and once we get all of this MIDI right, all these hits for the drums that you're seeing on this page. So let me show you. This is what the MIDI looks like, right? These are all the hits. And all of this MIDI is triggering inside Superior Drummer, which is what we use to do the drums. So once we get all that MIDI right, and it plays back through our drum set in Superior Drummer 3, and sounds pretty much right as far as like the hits or how much velocity, how hard it's hitting, all of that stuff is right, then you can go in and you can adjust how you want everything to sound, what drum set you want. So right now I'm using the Superior Drummer's Area 33 Origin, which is really good, and the Big Kit Damped. That's probably my favorite because it has a huge drum set with lots of options and just is pretty tight and sounds good right out of the gate and don't have to do much mixing. But you can go in here and you can swap all the different heads around, all the different drums around. You could choose a completely different drum set and all of that. And then once you get it close, you could even go into the mixer here and add your compression and EQ and things like that. I tend to not always do that because I usually add it inside of Logic afterwards. I kind of want like raw drum tracks to work with and then add the compression and all that stuff in Logic. But if you wanted it just sort of to be all done before you export the drum files, you can go into the mixer tab here in Superior Drummer and do it here if you want until you get it perfectly sounding right, and then export the wave files, which we do by going down here, hitting track, export song as audio file, and all this stuff comes up with lots of options. So you can bounce it all together into one file, the output channels, or this is what I usually do, bounce the microphone channels, and it splits up all the different mics into different audio files. And you can even get the bleeds and things if you want, and then you bounce that. Now what that's going to do is just create a bunch of wave files. So in here we have a drum bounce, and you can see this was just a test. If I had selected the bouncing it into one file, I would get this out 1+2 wave, and this would be all of the drums. But you can see on my other song, Begin Again, that this is how I usually do it, bouncing it into individual files, and you're gonna get all these different microphones, so the cowbell, the cymbals, the floor tom, all of this stuff in there, so that you can mix and EQ and put compression, all of that stuff on each one of these individual files. Okay, so that's how I get my drum sound. Once the drums are completely right, I'm going to obviously go track the bass. And the reason I do that is to sync up the bass with the kick really well and get the rhythm section completely down. Then I'll go back and I will track the electric and acoustic guitars. So here's a little clip, I guess, of the song we're doing. Okay, so you can hear that the drums, once they're in the mix and properly done, they sound pretty much like real drums, pretty close. Once you have your tracks, then you're actually going to do the mixing, right? Once you've recorded everything, and this is our mixing panel inside of Logic. And you can see that almost everything has a compression or EQ on it and a little bit of reverb. Obviously, there's lots more advanced things than that, but basically you're going to go in here and add all of your effects and get all your levels right on this. Once you get that almost done, it will sound, let's say, 90% finished. But then you need to do mastering. And in the old days, it was a little more difficult, and I used to use Isotope and a few other ones to master, which is still very good, but they're a little more complex. And the best ones that started coming out were using AI, and I'm not chat GPT AI, but like audio AI, the same technology they use to capture amps and things. They were using that to capture your frequency and sort of auto EQ everything to give you bass EQ to work from, and then you could sculpt it from there. Apple added that into Logic, and it is now here under this mastering tab in your stereo out. So if you go here, you can see the frequencies. It's cutting some here, cutting some there, boosting the bass, boosting the high ends. And I know a lot of people don't like this. They're gonna say I'm crazy, but this thing is so much better than any of the other EQ things out there. If you press this button, this one button, it gets your mix and your master about like 98% there. And it usually is doing, by the way, about 25 on the width here to spread out the stereo spread, which I find is like the perfect amount that I like. But it gets rid of any EQ issues basically. But if you still need to scoop, which you probably will a little bit, you can go in here to custom EQ, and you can drag all these EQs around and sculpt them here. You can also just get the slider, which will give you like say 80% of that EQ instead of the full 100%. And it has all these different characters. So transparent's what I usually use because I don't really want to hear the mastering. But you can also get punch, which has a little more compression, valve, which sounds sort of like tube, and clean. And again, once you select that, you can go in here and just drag the entire EQ down, or sit in here and change individual things. But the idea is that you get your EQ scooping and all of that stuff done on each individual track first until it sounds like almost there. Then use this tool to sort of give it a final sheen. And if you keep it on transparent and you do a little custom work here, you really can't tell that anything algorithmic was done, and it just ends up sounding great. So that's a really cool tool. And that is the basic process. There's a lot more to it, but that's the basic process of how I make songs. I plug into my pedal board, put all of my drives in front of the Fractal, and all of my effects on my pedal board in an effects loop. And then I can combine and mix, for example, the Eventide H90. I could mix its effects with the effects in the Fractal and balance them any way I want with that setup, just by changing the out 3 in Fractal. So if we go back to Fractal and we look at this, again, this is the effects loop, out 3, and then it goes back in to the Fractal. So it's going out to my pedal board and then back in from the pedal board. By changing this mix right here, this is going to turn down anything in my effects loop in the pedal board. So that allows me to, for example, use 2 reverbs or 2 delays, one from the H90, one from the Fractal, and I can completely balance, fine-tune how much of each one I'm hearing. But that's how I sort of balance out all my effects. And then typically I'm going to get a good but not over-the-top effect to record with, like a light reverb or something. And then after all that's done and my playing is good, the track is good, then I'll go in here and fine-tune, add reverbs, delays, compression, whatever I need to do inside of Logic. And then we'll go to mastering, finish up the mastering, and then export the song. So that's how that works. In the future, I'd like to talk about this Brothers pedal right here. This is an overdrive from Chase Bliss, and it is based on the Analog Man King of Tone. It is the best overdrive I've ever heard, and it replaced all my other drives and half of my fuzzes. But it is proof that not every drive pedal sounds great into Fractal. Some of them, no matter what you do, they just don't work well with modeled speakers, I guess. And don't get me wrong, Fractal's twin reverb amp sounds and plays and feels exactly like a twin reverb, but something with frequencies or impedance or something like that, not all of them sound that great. But this one just pairs perfectly, and you don't lose any tone, you don't lose any character. I would like to do a video on that because it's also MIDI capable. And this is the last thing I wanted to talk about, is that my entire board is controlled by the Luminite Graviton. It is basically a MIDI brain, sort of like the Morningstar, but it does a whole lot more. As you saw in the beginning, my guitar has a MIDI touchpad, so the MIDI passes through that, and that routes it all the way through the Fractal. I can control anything that has MIDI. I can control multiple things that have MIDI, multiple parameters with my touchpad. And this analog overdrive has MIDI capabilities, so I can store presets for different drive sounds. For example, if I want to go distortion into overdrive, or overdrive into distortion, or boost into distortion, or boost into overdrive, all those different settings and different gains and different tone, whatever, save those as presets and recall them with my silver pedal. And if I wanted to, I could even recall them by touching my touchpad. So that is pretty huge, amazing feature that a lot of overdrives don't have. This thing has totally changed my board, just like the Mood did when I got it. So I'll be doing an in-depth video on that one, and probably an in-depth on the Mood, even though there's been lots of those done, because I'm using it in a little bit different way, where I have some interesting ways where you can randomly turn knobs to come up with cool sounds and then save them as presets. But yeah, eventually I'd like to go through all of these in a future video and sort of explain the pedals. And then later on we'll go a little more in depth into the Fractal and some of its features and how I'm using that for my touchpad and MIDI stuff. Okay, so that's it. If you have any questions about these, I would love to hear it because it will help me make future videos. So for example, if you want to see a deep dive on the deep freeze or a deep dive on the tensor or something like that, let me know in the comments and I will get her done. Thanks for watching.